Welcome to the Earth Keepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life. And for many in the Earth Keepers community, that includes our spiritual practices. In this episode, we'll be talking to Dr. Debisi Araba, Managing Director of the African Green Revolution Forum. The AGRF is an organization that fosters community and collaboration among countries all across Africa. Focusing on agriculture in particular, the African Green Revolution Forum works to accelerate the continent's drive toward economic growth, human flourishing, and environmental health. Africa is rising, and it is the passion of people like Debisi that is driving the vision. He joins our conversation today from Kenya.
In my work, what I do, not just with the AGRF, but what I've always done, it's been driven by my unshakable faith in a prosperous Africa. I believe in a prosperous Africa so much. This feeling is so strong that I can taste it. And I think that's the message that I think we really need to be sharing with each other as humans. You know, we need to share that message of hope.
Welcome, friends, to the Earth Keepers podcast. Well, welcome, friends. We have a great episode today. Today, we are talking to Debisi Araba, and he is speaking to us from Africa. And Debisi, maybe tell me exactly where you are and talk about what it is you do day to day for the African Green Revolution Forum.
Thank you very much, Forrest. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm the managing director of the AGRF. It's now an initialism. And I have, I would say, maybe the best job in the world. I get to bring together all stakeholders working on agriculture transformation in Africa. So everybody all the way from government, civil society organizations, private sector at all scales. So all the way from smallholder farmers to large-scale commercial enterprises to other private sector entrepreneurs in the financial services sector, people working in the public policy sector, everyone who works to ensure that we can produce, distribute, process, and consume healthy, safe, affordable food, works and engages through the AGRF. And I'm proud to be a facilitator to the convenings of all these partners working on increasing shared prosperity in Africa.
You know, your website is quite inspiring, and we'll actually link to that in our show notes because I want people to see what it is you're about. And you're about a lot. You're really trying to do so much, but really in a way that I resonate with, because you're talking about accomplishing something vast and big in terms of Africa's prosperity as a whole, but emphasizing the fact that people cannot do that piecemeal on their own, separated. I mean, it really has to be all about collaboration, doesn't it?
Yes, that's right. It's the power of partnerships.
Mm-hmm. Now, your organization contains this word revolution, African Green Revolution Forum. Why that word? What's revolutionary about what you're doing?
The word has the history of the word comes from Mr. Kofi Annan, who made the call for a truly green African revolution. And what he was trying to whip up was the spirit of urgency. We would call it the fierce urgency of now, to ensure that we transform the agriculture sector to enable African economies to grow. No economy in the world has really transformed without first fixing its agriculture sector. And so he wanted to bring that fierce urgency of now. And so I suppose his choice of words was revolution. You know, we don't want to do things slowly. We certainly want wholesale changes to ensure that, you know, we create that rapid increase in prosperity in African economies and allowing them to diversify and grow.
I like the fact that you balance that word revolution with a positive spin word. I mean, one of the phrases you use on the website is Africa is rising, with signs of prosperity, etc. And so there's a very aspirational tone to this revolution, right? It's very inspirational, trying to help people catch a vision, I think, for something bigger. Do you feel like people are catching that vision?
Oh, yes. And you can see it right across the agri-food sector. So globally, the agri-food sector contributes about $8 trillion to global GDP. That's about 10% of global GDP. The African agri-food sector is not yet a significant player, but it's starting to emerge. We're starting to see public sector initiatives. We're starting to see lots of private entrepreneurship initiatives growing in different sectors, not just in production, but in the financial services sector, in the use of digitalization, mechanization, logistics, processing, food preservation and storage. There's so much happening in the agri-food sector. It's emerging. I mean, I see the green shoots of what will be a wholesale transformation in my lifetime.
It seems that fundamental to this goal is the understanding that Africa will not just produce enough to meet its own needs, African nations being self-sufficient, but also that there will be surplus to add to the global economy, thus increasing, the prosperity of the continent as a whole. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct. That's correct, Forrest. So by 2050, we will have about 10 billion people in the world. We need to ensure that the global population has access to healthy, safe, nutritious food that also doesn't create negative impacts on the environment. Africa will not just be a breadbasket to feed itself. It will be a breadbasket that will contribute to feeding the world.
So tell me, where is your work actually based? And then what is the scope of your reach in terms of other nations being involved in this?
The AGRF Secretariat physically is in Rwanda. We will be there for at least the next 5 years. Rwanda hosts the physical secretariat. Prior to that, the AGRF was in Kenya, in the city of Nairobi. And each year we host an annual summit, an AGRF summit in the first full week of September. And so for the next 5 years, Rwanda will host every other summit. And so every other year, the summit will move to another guest city, and Rwanda will remain as the host country for the AGRF. Just to give you the sense of the global reach of the AGRF, at this year's summit, we held it virtually, of course, due to the meeting and travel restrictions due to the global pandemic. We had over 10,400 delegates engaging during the AGRF virtual summit from 113 countries around the world. Of course, we have 54 countries in Africa, so it stands to reason that we had more than an African audience. We had a global audience over the 4 days of the summit from the 8th to the 11th of September. So our reach is global. Our mandate, of course, is the African continent. But in terms of the long-term impact is the world.
That, to me, it seems a formidable job, is bringing that many people from that many different perspectives together. But in particular, when you think of the African continent and just the diversity of cultures and worldviews that are represented in your constituency, how do you bridge those differences to help people to mobilize around this common vision?
There's a famous proverb: if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go with others. And I think that's the raison d'etre of the AGRF. We are built for partnerships. And the partnerships that we create are broad-based, multi-sectoral. And fortunately, we have a community of partners who buy into that vision of a transformed, prosperous African continent with a thriving agri-food sector. And so we have a group of partners who fund our operations and who buy into that vision and support that vision through the networks, the partnerships, the thought leadership, the practice leadership, the curation of engagements across the continent. The AGRF held its first summit in the city of Accra in 2010. And 10 years later, we've held our first virtual summit in collaboration with the government of Rwanda. And our reach, again, as I say, is global, and we continue to grow not just in influence, but also in impact.
One of the ideas that my organization, Circlewood, has been going deeper into is this idea that the diversity of a healthy ecology, it has a principle in it that in diversity is actually greater strength. And it's not just about more hands working together, it's more minds working together, more hearts working together, that that cultures coming together contribute things that are missing in terms of the larger whole, and that together we're healthier and stronger. Is that mindset behind what you're doing, that ecological diversity mindset?
That's right on the money, Forrest. So it's that beautiful symphony where you bring in the different instruments come together in harmony. We're making beautiful music here, and it's not any single voice crowding out the others. It's not governments shutting down private sector or vice versa. It's not civil society wanting to shut down any dissenting voices. It's bringing everyone together because ultimately one of the few things that connects us as a community, that connects humanity, is that we need food to survive and thrive. And so we don't just want to produce the food, but we want to ensure that in producing the food, we're creating pathways to prosperity. Some of the things that I hope we get into in the course of our conversation today.
As someone who works in community development, I often come up against developers' prioritization on human flourishing, which is as it should be. That's their job, right? But there is a growing movement of developers who understand that the health of the environment is critical to human flourishing and vice versa. People are starting to think more in terms of holistic systems and not just how do we meet human need today and for the future, and focus on human thriving. I know that you do use language in the descriptors of your organization. You speak about the urgency of climate change, et cetera. And, even the word green in your title suggests that there's a sensibility here that it's not just about people. I'm wondering if you could comment on that and talk about what is the green part of your organization's name?
Next year, the United Nations is convening a global food system summit. The Food System Summit has 5 core objectives. The first is to ensure access to safe and nutritious food for everyone. Second is to shift consumption patterns to sustainable sources. The third is boosting nature-positive production at sufficient scale. Then advancing equitable livelihoods and value distribution. As we know, people work. The act of producing, distributing, processing food, requires people to be employed. And finally, it's to build resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks, and stresses. Of course, one of the biggest shocks that we have as a body of humanity, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic, I still say this is nothing compared to climate change. Climate change is an existential threat to mankind. And so the way the AGRF is set up is to achieve those 5 objectives. We're not just producing food at the expense of the environment or at the expense of people's health or people's livelihood or at the expense of creating economic distortions. We really want to create shared prosperity in the true sense of what that means. Shared prosperity amongst humans, shared prosperity with the environment. And so what the AGRF tries to do is ensure that we bring in as broad a base of partners as possible. So it's not just people working directly in production of food. It's people working in the environment space. It's people working in public policy. It's people working in the financial services sector. It's people working to advocate for the gender discrimination, working on gender issues, working on the Gini coefficient to reduce the distortions in the gaps between the poorest and richest in society. So there's so many dimensions. It's sort of multidimensional, multifaceted. It's partly why I got into the agriculture sector anyway. It's because it's so diverse, the agri-food sector. You could go in there, and sort of branch out into, I would say, hundreds of possible career pathways. But it all connects us because we all eat food to survive.
I am curious about how you got where you are today. What is it, first of all, that motivates and drives you to do this work that you do now?
I do it because of love. I would say love is at the heart of what I do. My grandfather on my mother's side was a Baptist theologian, and he had the most beautiful cursive handwriting. I just can't describe it. I don't think I have the words to describe how beautiful my grandfather's handwriting was. He passed away a few years ago. And he would write our names in Bibles and cards that he would give us on our birthdays. Now, after he passed, my mother found a note that he had written, and it wasn't the note itself. It really was the handwriting that drew me to it, and I kept that note. And in it, he had included the famous Quaker words: "If therefore there be any kindness I can show, or any good thing I can do to any fellow human being, let me do it now. Let me not defer or neglect it, for I will not pass this way again." Now, this sentence, it really shapes how I see my service to humanity. And the second thing, I suppose, would be my love language. You have the 5 languages: words of affirmation, quality time, gift giving, acts of service, physical touch. Acts of service is my primary love language. It's the way I show that I care about you. And when I care about something, I give it my time, I give it all my resources. I don't advocate for farmers alone, to be fair. I advocate for everybody trying to earn a living, and those also trying to create the means for prosperity for others. So this, of course, includes governments. So in my work, I'm committed to seeing everybody in entrepreneurship, whether private entrepreneurship or public policy entrepreneurship, succeed. And I do everything. I give everything. I give my intellect, I give my resources, I give my time to ensure that they have the best chance of success.
When it comes to agriculture, I've spoken on this podcast to people who consider themselves primarily farmers, but have kind of problematized the definition of what it means to be a farmer. And they speak of a relationship to the earth that goes beyond production. It goes into the realm of relationship with the land, to know the land, to know how it produces, to know what it needs, to respect it in ways that avoid abusing the land. And I've learned a lot actually from the farmers we've spoken to. I'm wondering, in terms of your work, how would you, I know you're not a farmer, right? But clearly you're connected to all things agriculture. I'm wondering if you could describe your relationship to the environment, to the created world.
All living, breathing human beings are connected to the physical world. But for me, I think it's the emotions that my childhood years growing up with my dad, spending some Sundays when I was allowed to hang out with him and my grandfather on the family farm. My grandfather had a huge family farm where he would spend his Sundays. It's also sometimes, the emotions I get when I reminisce and think about the weekends. Sometimes my father would take my sister and I to the beach in Lagos. I grew up in Lagos in Nigeria, and we would go to the beach in Victoria Island called Bar Beach. Sadly, Bar Beach is not the same as it was due to the ocean erosion and aggressive commercialization by property developers. But it's also, you see, it's that passion to see nature, respect nature, to love nature, to appreciate the gift that we have as humans, and to understand that it's really in trust. We hold it in trust. We receive it from the previous generation. We hold it in trust for the next generation. And so everything that we do, I certainly would like my children to experience the things that I did. I want them to have the soft earth to feel the soft earth under their toes. I want them to smell the ocean spray at the beach. I want them to see the beautiful vistas and the sights. I certainly don't want to have them searching almanacs, or I don't know if they still do almanacs, surfing the internet, for photos or third hand or fourth hand narrations of what nature, what it felt like to be one with nature. So I certainly would like to have that as a legacy, to hand that over to the next generation, my children or other people's children. Certainly the next generation after me needs to appreciate and experience the world that I grew up in.
I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about AGRF in terms of some of the stories that will help us to understand what success looks like in organizational terms and values terms. when you look at either the macro level or something very local, what to you represents this idea or the fact that you've done your job well? Like what looks successful in terms of things that AGRF has done?
We need to move the needle. We help people either make decisions or improve the quality of decision making. One example is an AGRF partner, the CGIAR, the International Consortium on Agriculture Research, has two partner organizations. One is the Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security Program. The other is the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, which is now part of the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT. Now, they collaborated to develop this knowledge product called the Climate Smart Agriculture Profiles. Now, what do these profiles do? The profiles analyze priority agriculture value chains and then map out the vulnerabilities to climate change at different points of the value chain. First of all, it looks at the vulnerabilities. Then the next stage is it assesses the adaptation methods that value chain actors have taken to adapt to climate change. And in addition, it then proposes additional options to increase resilience at different points of the value chain. Now, this knowledge product, brilliant, really groundbreaking stuff, informed a critical $250 million investment in Kenya by the World Bank, $250 million Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture Program. The knowledge is improving investments in the agri-food sector. So investments like investing in roads, investing in bridges. So whether it's improving the journey or shortening the journey time that farmers will take from getting from their farms to the market, or improving infrastructure that would ensure you improve the logistics and supply chain systems of fresh produce. As you know, we have a nutrition deficit, not just in Africa, but around the world. And most of the most nutrient-dense foods have very short shelf lives. These are the fruits and the vegetables. So the investments would also help to ensure that you're shortening the journey time of healthy, nutritious food from where they're produced to where they're consumed. So you are directly contributing to a healthier environment, or the knowledge product is directly contributing to a healthy, better nourished population.
Hello, everyone. This is James Amadon. I'm the Executive Director of Circlewood, the organization behind the Earthkeepers podcast. I'm also the executive producer and occasional co-host of the podcast with Forrest. I'm here with my son, Teddy, to talk for a moment about the podcast.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing great. My dad helped start this podcast in March, and sometimes he records it from our house. He told me there are people who are listening in 32 countries and 6 continents. Wow!
Yes, wow indeed. We are grateful for every single one of you who have been listening. We've really enjoyed putting together our first inaugural season, and we're excited to launch Season 2 in January. We're happy to offer the podcast to everyone free of charge, but unfortunately, it's not free to make. If you find yourself, like so many these days, struggling economically because of the pandemic, we are praying for you, and just know that our only hope is that you continue to listen and be encouraged. If, however, the podcast has blessed you and you find yourself with some financial flexibility, would you consider a year-end gift to help support the show? It's really easy to send a one-time gift or to sign up as a monthly giver. You just have to visit our website at www.circlewood.online/podcast. There you'll find a clear link to our secure online giving portal. Whether you're able to give $5 or $500, every gift will help. And becoming a partner with us will ensure that we can continue to create the kind of episodes that explore the work of creative earthkeepers from around the globe. Episodes that empowers listeners just like you in your own work of earthkeeping, and help all of us make the world a better place for those of the next generation, like Teddy.
Thank you for listening to Earthkeepers and for all the ways you help take care of the earth.
Thanks indeed.
Happy holidays.
Debisi, one of the questions that we ask all of our guests is, what is it these days that causes you to despair? And conversely, where do you find your hope?
I see a lot of actions around the world that I wouldn't say makes me despair, but it does make me feel sad slightly when people don't see that their actions, it's a boomerang effect. Your actions will come back to hit you. And so you really need to do this because it's in everyone's interest. Everything we do is in our collective interest. In my work, what I do, not just with the AGRF, but what I've always done, it's been driven by my unshakable faith in a prosperous Africa. I believe in a prosperous Africa so much. This feeling is so strong that I can taste it. And I think that's the message that I think we really need to be sharing with each other as humans. We need to share that message of hope, regardless of what we're going through, whether it's a changing climate, whether it's job insecurity, economic insecurity. We've heard the gloom and doom predictions of a global recession in 2021 and beyond. We may or may not get a vaccine by Christmas. 2021 may or may not be a repeat of 2020. We've said, this year, I joke with my friends that, you have certain decades where nothing happens, and you have certain years where decades happen, to paraphrase a famous Russian. And I think it's important to just stay anchored. Your faith should anchor you. You need to believe in something, whether it's you're believing in the love of your life, you're believing in your work, you're believing in your mission, you believe in your parents, you believe in your children, you believe in your pet. I have a Labrador. I believe in her. She won't let me down. I think, you need to have an anchor an unshakable anchor that you hold on to. Now's the time to hold on to something, because that's what propels you, to be creative. So maybe I have one question for you.
Sure.
So I've given my mission to people listening now.
Mm-hmm.
So what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is people like you, quite honestly. I am hungry for hope. I am hungry for new ways of thinking, new ways of being. I'm hungry especially for ways to work with other people to help me and the listeners to this podcast to get out of that kind of internalized, introspective perspective on the fate of the world, and understand that, as you say, we're all in this together. So when I hear people say that gives me hope. But even more, when I see people actually doing it, that's what really fires me up. I'm wondering, in the work that you do, are there spiritual components to the work?
I think if you sort of parsed spirituality in a more generic, broader context, it's humanity. We are human, and we have a conscience. Spirituality is the conscience. So I would say yes. If there's anything that brings people of their own free will to engage through the AGRF, with the AGRF, then it's that shared spirituality that we can do something if we work together. Or success can be achieved through collaboration, or failure impacts us all. So there is that sort of shared purpose, if we call spirituality purpose.
Some of the students who have done projects for me in my courses in an African context have often made the case that there is a wealth of local knowledge, local perspective that needs to be heard. And it's a perspective that sometimes gets overwhelmed with the prescriptions from outside, from non-African development organizations who will fund projects on the conditions that things are done a certain way, that they know as experts, quote unquote, what works best. But many of my students are saying that there's a wealth of knowledge and understanding in multiple African cultures that the world needs to hear, that there are things that we need to learn from the African context. I wonder if you agree with that.
Oh, I do. And I think indigenous knowledge, wherever it is, by its very essence, needs to be respected. Of course, cultures are eclectic. I had a conversation with a friend earlier today about this. knowledge is a core component of culture, right? And with cultures, with culture, you see the eclectic nature. You pick up some parts as you go along or as you evolve. You leave some parts that you don't find useful, but you pick up parts you find useful. And I think over the course of humanity, we have found, if you go into local context, there are practices, just taking the agriculture sector specifically, there are certain practices that you will find that are so fine-tuned and perfect for local contexts that if you were not in that context, you would have no idea. And of course, we have seen in the past people distorting and overriding the supremacy of local context and indigenous knowledge. But I think we need to appreciate the role of indigenous knowledge wherever it is around the world. And so whether it's in conservation, in restoring degraded land, in soil conservation, in adjusting to a shifting and changing climate, there is a lot that we can gain by amplifying the knowledge that exists in communities, local communities around the world.
So I am speaking to you on November 5th. We are 2 days after our election here in the US. And I'll confess to you that I'm completely stressed out right now, not knowing who our president is going to be. And a lot of that stress for me has to do with my fears about the US's engagement or disengagement with issues of climate change and environmental restoration. We have gone backwards in so many ways in the last 3.5 years. And my fear would be that we would continue to go backwards with one certain outcome. So I'm speaking to you with some stress, but also some deep curiosity. You spoke of a nutrition deficit in Africa. I think in the US, we have a sanity deficit right now. I just don't understand why people don't understand. And I'm trying to understand that. But there just, in some cases, is a refusal to acknowledge what is happening on a global scale, especially with climate. I'm wondering, first of all, I'm super curious from the outside, what does everyone think about what's going on in the States? I'm really curious. I'm afraid to hear what you say, but I want to hear. How are people looking at what's going on, especially in terms of our stance on caring for the earth?
Speaking about the environment, I think officially the United States pulled out of the Paris Agreement yesterday. So the Paris Agreement, of course, on climate change, it's the global United Nations-led process to ensure that we can have this legacy to the next, or hand over this legacy of a beautiful, prospering, thriving planet to the next generation. As an outsider looking in, truth be told, I don't think it's as amplified as maybe Americans think the world assumes. Perhaps it's more of, I think Americans need to be easier on themselves. Don't give yourselves a hard time. America is still respected around the world. America is bigger than any individual. It's bigger than any political party. It's bigger than any single ideology. It's what America represents. It's the hope of the modern world. And I think the beauty of America is the ability to stumble, dust itself up, and keep walking. You know, America doesn't fall flat on her face and stay down. America gets back up. And I think that's the hope. We have hope that America will figure it out. Come what may, America is going to figure out a way to be prosperous. And the world will watch and follow. America is leading the way. And so I think as an outsider looking in, things might appear bleak, but trust me, it could have been much worse had you not been such a robust and mature society. So when I speak to people, I tell them, well, you have an evolution in the course of humanity. And so there is nothing that's happening in the United States of America that should really shock us. You know, it just tells us we have flaws as human beings. And that is fine. You know, that is fine. If we have flaws as human beings, it's okay, because we have the opportunity to course correct. And I think America will course correct, and we have hope that it will happen soon.
I have a feeling that when people listen to this, they're just going to be so grateful for those words. I think we need those words, not just of comfort, but words of hope and perspective that if we look at the big picture, if we're in this for the long haul, you're right. Things are not as bleak. We tend, I think, at least I do, I'll say, to look at the immediate crisis and maybe get overwhelmed sometimes. So I appreciate your words of wisdom. When it comes to Africa as a continent or even specific nations, if you have some in mind, when you think about their contribution to the broader conversation of climate change, what are some of the things that you think the world ought to be listening to? Again, in that idea of diversity yielding strength and wholeness of perspective.
I'll give two examples. The first comes from southern Niger. Niger is the country north of Nigeria in the Sahel region of West Africa. In Niger, there is a mini miracle happening because in the almost near complete arid conditions, we're seeing a greening or a regreening or reforestation of areas using and utilizing indigenous knowledge. Now, if you looked at satellite imagery of northern Nigeria, you would see parched land, and then you just shift further north, which you would think geographically it should get drier into Niger, but it's actually greener. And so there's a lot of indigenous knowledge that is being practiced in southern Niger on restoring degraded land. Of course, you have weathered soils, you have the heat, you have the aridity from low rainfall availability and high variability. But due to certain practices of soil conservation, planting resilient crops, etc., Niger is showing the way in what we can do to restore degraded land. The other move that really warms my heart is the Great Green Wall project. Now, the Great Green Wall is an ambitious plan to reforest 8,000 kilometers, an 8,000 kilometer wide belt or long belt across the Sahara of Africa from East to West Africa. Why? To address, not just to halt the encroachment of the Sahara Desert, but to also ensure that you're improving and investing in the livelihoods of people and restoring degraded land. As you know, or you might have heard in the news, the Sahel region of West Africa is highly turbulent, highly volatile. One of the reasons, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons is the loss of livelihood due to climate change. In West Africa, you have the Lake Chad that's dried up, shrunk to a fraction of its original size. So meaning people who previously used to thrive and had their livelihoods in aquaculture and fisheries don't have that anymore. Those who used to practice agriculture have failing crops now due to climate change. And so the Great Green Wall project is focusing an intergovernmental partnership on addressing not just the issues of climate change, but also issues of economic prosperity through investing in livelihoods and addressing restoring degraded land. And it's beautiful to see all these countries collaborating, or at least committing to collaborate on an outcome that spans multiple countries. It's not just one country. So it's one of those, green shoots of partnerships. I missed the partnerships because of where I work with the AGRF. I keep an eye out for these things. It's something that we can show the world that, humanity can come together when the occasion calls for it. And it's happening in Africa.
That is such a good point. I mean, we focus a lot, of course, on the Paris Climate Accord, but you're talking about this other sort of collective visioning and pursuit of something higher and bigger than single individuals or individual nations. And it brings to mind the question, coming back to this phrase, Africa is rising. Do you think that Africa is going to be in some ways a beacon for the world in terms of the ways they're coming together, the things that they're trying to achieve together, the ways that they are crossing boundaries of worldview and culture in order to pool resources and perspectives and collective wisdom?
I think what the world will see is a level of collaboration and unity, of purpose and vision and destiny that we can share with the world. There's a spirit of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is I am because we are. And if once you start to feel that way, that you exist you're connected to a global community of humans. You don't exist as an island or in a silo. And I think we're starting to see more of that. And I certainly hope that this is a gift that Africa or Africans can give to the rest of the world.
We've been in conversation with Dr. Debisi Araba, Managing Director of the African Green Revolution Forum. For more information about AGRF and their work, please go to the show notes for this episode on the podcast website. We invite you to become a supporter of Earthkeepers. Please visit our website at www.circlewood.online/Earthkeepers to make a donation that will help expand the reach and frequency of this production. It also helps us immensely when you leave a positive review on Apple Podcasts. And please share this podcast with anyone you know who seeks to become an agent of change and advocacy for the good of the earth. Earthkeepers podcast explores ways in which we can change ourselves, our communities, and our cultures to help us to care for the earth in holistic and regenerative ways. Through curated conversations, we highlight the wisdom of thought leaders and change agents who are making a difference and showing us a way forward. When Earthkeepers stand together, they amplify the impact of their resistance against environmental injustice and multiply their efforts for renewal and restoration. This podcast is an expression of Circlewood, an organization whose purpose it is to cultivate transformative communities that love and care for all creation. I'm Forrest Tinsley, your podcast host. Our executive producer is James Amadon. Forrest Reed is our sound engineer and the creator of our original music. Our research assistant is Rochelle Nordman. Thank you, friends, for listening. And please join us for our next conversation on the Earthkeepers podcast.